Silence in a conflict is not withdrawal. It is a calculated power move, and it works almost every time. Most people interpret it as someone shutting down, pulling back, unable to continue. That reading is wrong. And that misreading is precisely what the tactic depends on. The moment someone goes quiet, you start filling in the gaps, replaying the conversation, wondering what you said. That internal spiral is not a side effect of the silence. It is the intended result. The question was never whether this happens. It was always whether you're the kind of person it works on. Silence is one of the most effective behavioral tools in any high-stakes interaction, professional or personal. It requires no words, leaves no evidence, and cannot be directly challenged. And it consistently produces a very specific psychological response in whoever receives it. It transfers the emotional weight of the conflict entirely onto you. Not through pressure, not through argument, through absence. Today we're going to decode exactly what's happening when someone goes quiet. The behavioral mechanism underneath it, the different forms it takes, and the precise response that neutralizes it completely. No emotional reaction required. No confrontation necessary. Because here's what most people in leadership, negotiation, or any high-stakes professional dynamic get wrong. The silence itself is never the problem. What you do in the first few minutes after it arrives, that's where the dynamic gets decided. Before we go further, think about the last time someone went quiet on you in the middle of something unresolved. What did you do in the hours that followed? Did you reach out? Did you soften a position you were certain about before the silence started? Hold that. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened and what to do differently. Section 1. The vacuum transfer. In any conflict, there is emotional weight, tension, unresolved pressure, the discomfort of something unsettled. Normally, that weight is shared between both people in the interaction. When one person goes silent, they step out from under their share of that weight. And here's the mechanism that makes this so effective. Your brain is wired to fill social voids. Not as a weakness, as a survival feature. For most of human history, unresolved conflict within a group was genuinely dangerous. The drive to close the loop, restore the connection, resolve the tension that kept communities functional. It kept people alive. In a modern, professional, or personal context, that same drive becomes a liability. The moment the silence lands, you begin generating explanations. You replay the conversation, looking for the moment things shifted. You draft messages you don't send. You consider reaching out. You soften. Not because you changed your mind, but because the discomfort of the open loop is driving you toward resolution at any cost. The person who went silent is not suffering. They are waiting, calmly, while you carry the full emotional load of a conflict that belongs to two people. Here's the real-world version you've probably lived. A colleague, a manager, a business partner? Someone whose alignment matters, goes quiet after a disagreement. No hostile message, no clear signal, just absence. And within hours, you're the one reaching out, checking in, adjusting your tone, possibly walking back a position that was entirely reasonable. They didn't win the argument. They just waited while the silence did the work. The behavioral shift that neutralizes this starts with one recognition. The vacuum is only pulling you because you're trying to fill it. Every message you send, every softening of your position, every attempt to reestablish contact before they're ready, feeds the dynamic instead of breaking it. The vacuum only has power while you're moving toward it. Section 2. 3 silences, 3 different reads. Not all conflict, silence operates the same way. Treating it as a single behavior is one of the most common and most costly diagnostic mistakes in any professional or interpersonal context. There are three distinct types. Each requires a completely different response. Regulatory silence is genuine. Someone has hit the limit of what they can process in the moment. This silence is preceded by visible overload, a change in tone, a sudden flatness in the voice, a shift in posture. It is not strategic, it is physiological. The correct response: give space without narrative, no pursuit, no interpretation. Take the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. Strategic silence is deliberate. It arrives at a very specific moment, almost always when someone's position is becoming difficult to defend. Not as withdrawal, as repositioning. This is the silence that activates the vacuum transfer. It ends when you've softened, not before. Punitive silence is the most aggressive form. It is silence used as active punishment, a withdrawal of presence designed to produce anxiety and compliance. Unlike strategic silence, it doesn't end when you've adjusted your position. It ends when it has achieved a specific emotional outcome. Misreading these three as the same behavior leads to the wrong response every time. Diagnosis before reaction. Always. Section 3. What the silence is actually marking. Here's the part most people miss entirely, because they're too busy managing their own response to the silence to see it. Strategic silence almost always reveals more than it conceals. The moment someone goes quiet in response to a specific point in a conversation, they have marked that point. They have indicated, without words, where their position is weakest, what they couldn't answer, what they needed to stop. Watch the timing. Strategic silence doesn't arrive randomly. It arrives at the exact moment the pressure was working. The exact point where the argument was shifting. The exact sentence that landed somewhere uncomfortable for them. That is information. The person who goes silent thinks they've reset the dynamic. What they've actually done is left a visible marker on the map. One that tells you precisely where to return when the conversation resumes. If this is landing differently right now, it's because you've been here. You've walked away from a silence somehow less certain of a position you were completely clear on before it started. Tell me in the comments, what was the situation? And did you realize what had happened at the time or only afterward? Now here's the recalibrated response for the strategic silence specifically, and it requires a very particular kind of discipline in a professional context. When the silence arrives, your task is not to resolve the discomfort. Your task is to stay anchored to what was true before the silence and make that visible through your behavior, not your words. You acknowledge the silence once, cleanly. I can see you need some time. My position hasn't changed. I'm ready to continue when you are. That single response does three things simultaneously. It closes the vacuum. You've acknowledged the pause without chasing it. It holds your position without escalating. No aggression, no emotional charge. And it communicates with complete calm that the silence did not produce the softening it was designed to produce. The tactic depends on your discomfort driving you toward them. The moment your behavior stops confirming that dynamic, the entire frame collapses. Section 4. The composed non-response. Everything we've decoded leads to one behavioral principle. In any form of conflict silence, regulatory, strategic, or punitive, the person with the most composed non-response controls what happens next. Not the person who speaks first. Not the person who reaches out. Not the person who generates the most creative path to resolution. The person who remains most internally anchored while the silence operates. This is what emotional control looks like at the behavioral level in practice. Not indifference, not coldness, not punishment in return. Complete internal stability in the presence of external pressure. The kind of composure that reads, to anyone observing, as someone who simply doesn't need the other person to move first. In a negotiation, a performance review, a client relationship, a leadership dynamic, that composure is not just a defense against this specific tactic. It is a signal. It communicates that you operate from a position, not from a reaction. And silence, as a tactic, only has leverage while you need what's being withheld. The moment your behavior stops confirming that need, the dynamic recalibrates in your direction. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, simply because the tactic ran out of fuel. Every mechanism we decoded today runs on the same underlying code. The silence works because it makes you the primary agent of your own destabilization. The silence itself doesn't hurt your position. Your response to it does. Your need to fill it does. Your interpretation of it as evidence against yourself does. This is the deeper pattern connecting everything. And it connects directly to the last video on this channel. The most effective forms of social pressure don't push you. They build conditions in which you push yourself. They create an absence, introduce ambiguity, and then wait while your own mind completes the work. The defense against all of it is the same. The ability to observe what's happening in a dynamic before you respond to it. To stay outside the frame long enough to see it clearly. To ask, what is this designed to produce in me before you produce it? That is not a personality trait. It is a skill. Trainable, precise, and worth building deliberately. Most people spend their entire professional lives reacting to dynamics they never learned to read, responding to silences they never decoded, carrying weight that was never theirs to carry. You just learned to read one of those dynamics. The rest of the map is here. If you're building toward the kind of clarity that doesn't need anyone else's noise or anyone else's silence to stay intact.